Listen, I love a good bubble bath, but if a 20-minute soak was the answer to everything, we'd all be thriving, right? Welcome to Your Well Life, the podcast that goes way beyond self-care checklists and into the real work of healing, alignment, and actually feeling alive again. I'm Misha Vayner, trauma-informed transformation mentor, holistic health and life coach, and mom of 3, here to inspire you to break free from burnout, reconnect with yourself, and create a life that actually feels like home. And we're not pretending it's all deep and serious 24/7 because real growth, it's sacred, but it's also messy, hilarious, and sometimes best understood through a pop culture analogy. Each week, you'll hear inspiring stories of resilience, soulful conversations about healing, reinvention, optimizing your well-being, and honest insights to help you move from struggle to flow in motherhood, marriage, friendships, career, and beyond. I'm endlessly curious about what makes people tick and thrive, whether it's a breakthrough moment, a hidden grocery cart treasure, or even a Bravo show revelation. Because healing isn't just found in the heavy work, it's woven into the everyday human experience. Real life isn't polished, growth isn't linear, but within the real, raw moments, there's a path forward, and you don't have to walk it alone. Hit subscribe and let's get into it. Hi, you guys. Welcome back to another episode of Your Well Life. Today, I'm talking to the Jessie Harold. Jessie Harold is a coach, a doula, and the author of MotherShift. It's a book about reclaiming motherhood as a rite of passage. Did you know, you guys, that matrescence, the word matrescence, is an entire thing, meaning it's not just motherhood. We don't just have a baby. The whole experience of matrescence, the transformation in all the ways, the complete radical shift that a mother navigates and goes through, comes into, experiences, there's a term for it, and it's called matrescence. And I, someone who's been in the motherhood space and has 3 children, didn't even know it existed. Surprise, surprise, because that is also a representation of how undervalued mothers really are. But I digress. This conversation is so important because Jessie Harold is the person to talk about matrescence and all of the things. We talk about what it really means to move through matrescence, what is involved in that journey, how the myth about bouncing back, what sort of the experience of coming into self or losing self is. We go into all of that. We talk about the systemic reasons that so many of us feel like we're failing. We go into the motherhood rage and resentment that many experience, why that happens, and a lot of the invisible labor. Like, in theory, it's like, yeah, find a village and give yourself self-care and blah, 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 blah. But in reality, everyone is under-resourced. Nobody is fully cared for. The systems and the way we've evolved as a society as living separately without ancestors and multiple caregivers supporting. If you are a mom trying to understand how the heck to feel good and to navigate this, you're seeking validation and tools and just like a really gorgeous conversation, this is for you. And if this episode touches something inside of you, if it resonates, if it moves you, or if it just helps you feel a little less alone, I'd be so grateful if you shared it, send it to a friend who thinks needs to hear it, share it on Instagram and tag me. These are the conversations that not only need to be heard, but that really help get these conversations, these healing messages out to the hearts and minds that I'm doing this for. So if this is meaningful to you, also please consider leaving a quick rating and review. It's one of the most supportive ways to help me grow. And if you want to dive into deeper conversations like this, into truth-telling, soul care, and get monthly practices and honest community, I'd love to have you inside the Well Circle. It's on Substack. It's only $12 a month, and it's made for mamas like you who crave tenderness, realness, and a space to exhale. The link is in the show notes. And now, let's dive into this potent and resonant conversation with Jessie Harold. Welcome. Thank you so much again. I heard you on Becca Piastrelli's podcast, Belonging, which I know you have your own book coming, which I think is so incredible as well. But when I heard you speak, I literally found myself both clapping, crying, like so cracked open by your words. It was deeply validating as well, because I feel that there's obviously, we'll get into all the things, but just to frame the discussion, there are so many things that we silently struggle with as mothers because of the lack of value, understanding of the extreme transformation and burden and load and complexity that motherhood holds. And with the result of there not being language around it, real clear understanding around it from a scientific standpoint, from a psychological standpoint. And with the result, we often feel shame. It puts pressure on us where we feel like we're not doing it right. And by hearing you speak to a lot of the things ranging from the term reproductively hyperburdened to matrescence to so many other things, the systemic oppression and all of the different things, it really, I felt, was even if you changed nothing as a mother, by understanding what is real, what is true, what is happening, and understanding these concepts, I feel the validation already eradicates so much shame and pressure. And so I my podcast called Your Well Life obviously is really focused in speaking to mothers and helping them to release the shame they're carrying, feel less stressed, more embodied, and really in a journey of self-return and wholeness. And so, with that said, I'm really grateful and excited to dive into this conversation of having you share so much about the MotherShift and matrescence and your work. So, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Yes. So first, I just want to say I love that you are a doula. Ironically, and I say that because I really do resonate with the fact that supporting mothers in that potent and really powerful, and as Glennon Doyle would say, brutal, like beautiful and brutal shift into motherhood is, I believe, truly the most incredible, like beautiful. There's nothing more rewarding, I would think, than that. And when I had my first, I actually went down a whole rabbit hole of wanting to be a doula and a midwife as well. And I met Ina May Gaskin, but I realized that I can't live without sleep. I say that to say that. So I love that you do this work. I'd love for you to share just an overview of the work. And then I would love to lead that into how you support mothers in this powerful rite of passage, not just in your doula work, but in your work as overall.
So I became a doula about 17 years ago. And when I first started doing that work, it looked like traditional doula work. So I supported mothers through sort of the weeks leading up to birth and then during their births and then in the weeks postpartum. And did that work for a lot of years. And I did that work before actually becoming a mother myself, it's sort of an
Wow.
unusual, yeah, it's a bit of an unusual orientation to the work. Most people become a doula because they rather had a really great birth experience of their own or a really terrible birth experience of their own, and they want
Yeah.
to support other mothers, but I didn't. And about 4 years into that work, I was starting to ask the maybe baby question in my own life. And I happened to be at a talk for other birth workers by another doula who said that the transition to motherhood takes 2 to 3 years. And even though I'd been working in this field for a while at that point, I never heard that before. And it was like we weren't talking about what it meant for a person to transition into motherhood almost at all. We talked a little bit about postpartum depression back then. This was 14 years ago. And we were just starting to talk about the fourth trimester, like that first 3 months postpartum. We certainly weren't talking about a years long process.
No.
And yeah, and so I was super intrigued and I went to go talk to her and ultimately she became my doula. I got pregnant and went on to have two babies. And so I think that was the beginning of my orientation towards not just the birth and immediate postpartum, but what happens to us as mothers afterwards. We talk about all of the milestones that our children hit, and we pay a lot of attention to like the child in that dynamic, but little at that time, and still very little is known about what happens to a mother during that process of what we now have a word for. It's called matrescence. So is the word that we use to define that 2 to 3 year process. And it encompasses things like biological, psychological, social, economic, even spiritual changes that happen to us. Really, it's everything changes, right? When we go through that
Yeah.
transition. So I guess my work started to kind of transition and transform. At that point, I became a coach and I started working with mothers through this kind of 2 to 3 year process. And I also was noticing that as motherhood changed, the people that I was working with, they were changing every other aspect of their lives too, right? So they were
Mm,
upending their careers, changing their intimate partnerships, their sense of community and friendship and family, right? This entire ecosystem of lives were changing. And so my work gradually evolved from there around not just that matrescent experience, but also beyond and all of the transitions that we moved through. So that's like the origin story of how I got into this work. And now, of course, we're increasingly recognizing matrescence as an experience. It's becoming, like, in some circles anyways, more of a household term. Some people
mm.
still have never heard it before or
Yeah.
heard of it. But yeah, so it's we're growing this awareness around that experience and having more conversations about it.
Yeah, I love what you just shared because I really feel that to your point, we have this like subconscious fixed under there's a sick fixed understanding that it's almost once you become an adult, like you've arrived, and then until maybe you're retiring, there's this whole window where it's like you're just supposed to have you're now an adult, so you should know, and that's who you are. And to your point, there's all these micro stages of the development of a child and throughout, but we don't actually realize that there's a perpetual constant evolution that is shifting of our priorities, our capacities, our and all of those different things. And so I think that the fact that this word matrescence, the coming of and the perpetual, I guess I'm assuming evolution of reclamation or not reclamation, but it's like it sounds to me like it's like a two track of a journey into this version, this I don't know, this role of a mother that and what comes with it, while also a sort of reclamation of self in some way. I don't know, it's like twofold, the role of the mother and then how yourself like evolves. And I don't know, it's really interesting because yeah, I really just sat with that concept as you were talking of we just feel that we should know. And also to your point of it's like you have a baby and you think you have this baby. Now I've done it and I should know and I'll figure out like what to do. But what about the fact that I just actually wrote this post about my parents this morning saying like, what if we could remember that it's our parents' first time too being in this season of their life curriculum and journey and giving our mothers, our parents the grace that we wish our kids could give us because there are so many things that of course I think I'm trying to do the best job that I can and I would think that I'm wanting to do a better job, but there's so many things that I'm not getting right. And similarly, it's easy for me to be like, why didn't my parents do this? Why didn't they? But they're also in their first journey. And so I think just this perspective shift of it being an ever evolving journey. And so knowing this, knowing that there's so much expectation and not enough awareness around what those phases are, or what is happening when you come into motherhood. What are some of the things that you do to support mothers in what can be a very dysregulating and jarring and feel eat no matter how much you plan or how much of a surprise it can still feel very abrupt and rock your world. And so what are some of the ways that you kind of support moms into this journey of matrescence?
Yeah, great question. There's a lot there. So you're right that I think a lot of us consider this transition to motherhood to being like a set of new skills or capacities that we have to learn that once we learn how to change diapers and make really strong coffee, then we're officially a mom. And what we overlook is that this change is not just a behavioral one. It's not only a change to the things that you're doing, it's a change to who you are, your
Mm,
fundamental identity, right? And you're right, like you're going through this huge transformation, this huge personal identity shift. All of these areas of your life are likely changing, while also being on the learning curve of caring for a little person, especially if it's your first time around. Matrescence happens with every child, but certainly the first time around when you're learning how to do all of these things. I guess that happens with all the other babies too. But yeah, so it is really disorienting. And it is, yeah. So I guess the way that I have devised to support mothers through this journey is to come up with a framework that kind of describes how the process of matrescence unfolds. And so we know a little bit more about the fact that matrescence is a thing, like people are
mm,
talking about it more and more.
that's
But what we
huge.
don't, it is absolutely. I've joked that this is maybe like the one thing that a pamphlet would actually work for,
Yeah.
because because just having a word, having this word is so validating for people sometimes that
Yes.
sometimes that's
It's
all they need.
it's wild. I'm actually just having a moment right now of how wild it is that there hasn't been a term to explain this journey that is the most important journey like ever, and not just for
Yeah.
mothers, for everybody.
Yeah,
It's
totally,
wild.
totally. Yeah, it totally is. It's wild and it's also somewhat unsurprising in the culture that we live
Sadly,
in. But yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, so when I first started digging into this work, what I couldn't find in sort of the research literature was how the process unfolded. So we knew that it happens, but not how it happens.
Mm,
And I really expected to find something, but once again, I guess ultimately unsurprised that nobody had explored this yet. Um,
right.
yeah, so I set out to devise a model of my own that would help mothers to know what to expect along the way. It's not like a prescription. It's not, well, first you do this and then you do this. It's quite nonlinear. I liken it to, I'm a big hiker, and I liken it to having like trail markers.
I
You
love that.
know, you might feel like you're lost, but then you're walking along and like you look up and you see a trail marker, and there's just this profound sense of settling. Okay, I'm here. I've got some trail behind me. I've got some trail ahead of me that I can orient. And I know that I'm on the trail, which is, I think,
Yeah.
so important in this journey, especially when it takes several years to
Yeah.
know. I think it's just profoundly normalizing, right? Like that,
Yes.
even if this experience is challenging, it's likely that I'm not alone here and that there's nothing wrong with me. I'm not broken, I'm becoming, as I like to say.
I love that because I feel like even just the process, when you said it's not a step by step of do this, because I feel like so many people were hardwired to have that structure and to have that be what makes them feel a false sense of safety. Even just them learning how to surrender to the releasing of the step by step and leaning into this sort of more, leaning into and almost surrendering to this more fluid, loose space, but having these anchor points is in and of itself a deeply healing, liberating, and deeply healing and liberating and profound experience. Because I feel like something that motherhood, what, as we know, like the more that where we experience as the stressors and the stakes are higher in life, you find yourself having to release and surrender to that which just is no longer a fit because you just don't have the capacity to hold all this stuff anymore. And so it's like forces you to let go a little bit and lean in, which I think is such a blessing, but can feel disorienting. And so knowing that there's a space you've created and a book you've written and language and all of the things that you've done to help, like you said, normalize and help people just feel reminded that even if it feels wobbly and untethered, there are these guideposts. You are on track. This is the step by step, like this, what you're. And so I think that's really beautiful. And so I would love for you to talk a little bit about, like, we talked a little bit about like returning, or actually the journey of self as we come into motherhood. And I would love for you to talk a little bit about how, I know you've mentioned, I listened to you in a few other podcasts about the like camp that's not the, and the pressure we feel to not lose ourselves and to not lose our bodies and to not, to feel like we can just keep on trucking and soldiering on just with baby in tow. You don't need to stop XYZ. You can just keep. And so I want to actually have a conversation around that piece and like what your feelings are around the coming of self and the losing of self piece.
We say the worst thing that you could do is lose yourself in motherhood. And then we now have this whole culture dedicated to mothers bouncing back to their previous lives. And the truth is that any major transformation in our lives asks us to become someone new and to then therefore let go of who we used to be. And so it's interesting since the word sounds like adolescence, and we think of adolescence as a change that takes a lot of years. We joke about how painful it is and how challenging it is, right? Because all of us as adults can look back and see that, yes, it was hard, but also that at the end of it, you become more of who you are and you kind of have a
Yes.
stronger sense of self and identity. And oftentimes you have a sense of how you want to contribute to the world. And so the exact same thing happens in matrescence. Although we're caught up saying, oh, wait, no, nothing should have changed. You shouldn't change in motherhood. If we told adolescents that, we don't want our teenagers acting like children again. We would think that was bad.
Yes. That's
So,
so
so it's
interesting.
interesting when we make that juxtaposition, it's almost ludicrous to think that motherhood shouldn't change you.
Yeah.
Um, there's some nuance here because there are many ways in which culture kind of creates situations in which we lose ourselves in motherhood. And there's like this shadow side of that experience where perhaps if you don't have mat leave and have to go back to work while you're literally still bleeding from birth, or if you can't afford childcare, or any number of sort of those systemic influences on our experiences can also cause you to lose yourself in motherhood, but not for the right reasons, right?
Right.
So it's important to name that. But I think it's also important to name that it's not just that you're losing yourself in motherhood, but that in fact you become someone new, and that someone may even be, again, more of who you are. And
Yes.
you talked earlier, you mentioned this sort of, we have all these milestones for children, but not for adults. We actually do have this field of adult development psychology, which
Oh.
there's lots of kind of arguing theories. Basically, like adult development psychologists love to argue with each other, but lots of different theories about the milestones that we go through as adults. But fundamentally, if you were to like paint with a wide brush, look at all of those theories and summarize them, you would see that as adults, over time, as we mature, hopefully, so not a given, as I'm sure we know a few people who have not matured over time in adulthood. Generally, this process of mature adult development allows us to hold complexity and paradox with more ease. It allows us to become more interdependent and minded. It allows us to be more intuitive and in-source our sense of knowing and validation and worth, as opposed to externally sourcing that and externally sourcing the sort of how should we be in the world. There's a number of these kind of general markers of adult development that actually we see in a well-supported matrescence experience. There's like skyrocket into new realms of these capacities and abilities. So it's like motherhood is the testing ground for so
Yeah.
many of these things. And we become more able to hold nuance and we
Yeah.
become more interdependent. It's almost forced upon us,
Adapt.
right? We
Yeah.
have to. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
So
It,
there's this potential that matrescence holds to grow us up. and
Yes.
to put us more deeply in touch with our authenticity. And I say potential for a reason here because I think so many mothers are not well supported through this process.
Mm,
There are systemic barriers that hold us
yes.
back.
Which we'll
And
talk
I
about for
think
sure.
totally, I think that can really us in this
Yes.
kind of developmental process. And also, there is tremendous potential there. And I think recognizing that helps us to give mothers better resourcing during this time.
100%. Yeah, I think a few things that you touched on, I just want to speak into. One of them is, so I would agree that there is a coming of self that I think happens you're when you're less resources and you just don't have the capacity to give a shit. But also I think it's a time like okay, before going into this journey of my life, this chapter of my career, if I will, which started when I first had when I had my first child, who's now 11, and it started just before that, so maybe 12 years ago. I spent the first segment of my career in luxury fashion and so different. But what's interesting is, like I said, when I first got pregnant and I went on this whole, I was deeply passionate about supporting mothers and wanting to be a doula and all these things, and went back to work in fashion after I had my first, because it's a whole other story for another day. But the point is, I had a retail store that closed and I had a $5 million lawsuit and I now had a baby. And I
Mm.
had to I was in the red and I didn't have the agency to just willy nilly do what I wanted to do. I needed to go back to what my experience was in. Anyway, I say that to say, when I went back to work, I was at Saks Fifth Avenue, and I remember in my body, and you say it's a 3 year experience, 2 to 3 years, which is so interesting because I went back in 2014 and I left in 2017. And during that period, of which I was also building this, I remember feeling in my body, I have no idea why this all of a sudden doesn't feel like a fit. Like I feel like an alien. I don't feel like I I was doing this for the past however many years, but for some reason, even though from a skill level, technically I can do it, something doesn't feel aligned. And I felt so out of sync. And from a priority standpoint, from a energetic standpoint, there's just so many things. Forget about the hours and stuff, more just, and it was like what really matters, what do I really freaking care about? Because when you have like little babies, it just puts so much into perspective of what really matters. And I think it forces you, I think there's so much that comes with that really just, there's a huge priority shift, as you mentioned. And so I think there is, I think, and deep down, I've always been like, I applied for the Peace Corps when I was younger. I was always volunteer. Like I've always been in my heart that, but I was living out of my conditioned self for a very long time. And it was like, when I had the kids, it was like, all of a sudden it was like who I really am came forward. And
Mhm.
so when that kind of just really came forward for me, of it invites you back home from self. But then also there's this, when you said there are parts of you that lose yourself, what I equated that to too is like losing your mind a little bit, because
Mm.
there's so much happening in your mind, like both from a like what needs to happen from a like survival standpoint, as well as your own reflections on goals and dreams, like it's just so much that it can feel like just a complete mind fuck, like just how do I even process, like overload. And
Mhm.
then you spoke about, which is I think the most important thing that I want to get into, and that is like the limiting factors that impact our ability to, that kind of, or influence and impact the way that we are able to show up as mothers. And first and foremost, like I touched on earlier, you mentioned the phrase reproductively hyperburdened, and that mothers are, and that two or even four hands, that we're not actually biologically equipped to take care of children on our own. Not that we're not equipped, but you can speak to it. So I would love to actually open it up to that, of if you can speak to that and also dovetail into like the evolutionary sort of changes that have happened, how that's impacted mothers, and then we can talk about the systemic limitations. And
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. So the big kind of umbrella that this all kind of fits under is all of the challenges that confront us, new mothers, like particularly as modern mothers, right? And a lot of mothers, I think, say, my mother did this. How come I can't do this? My grandmother did this. How come I can't do this? This sort of certain confluence of things that make becoming a mother in our modern, primarily Western culture really difficult. And I talk about that at length in the book, and you're touching on one of those things, which is the lack of or loss of what we might call the village and the community of people around us that are meant to be able to, help us care for our babies. Yeah, so most of us are finding ourselves, and I will say that this is a rather white nuclear family experience that is quite common, that there is a mother who is a primary caregiver for the children of this family, and that there are few other adults, either chosen family or birth family, around to support us to do that. And evolutionarily, we know from the work of Dr. Sarah Blaffer Hardy, who looked at the anthropology and biophysiology of child rearing, and there's a number of kind of different elements of this that we could get into, but as you're speaking
Mhm.
to this idea of being reproductively hyperburdened. So the way that humans have evolved is that we have the ability to have our babies really close together, and those babies happen to be have pretty high intensity needs. They require a lot of caregiving in the early years, and that evolved, those kind of two traits evolved because there were always other mothers or other caregivers around to help us. Inherent in that understanding is that essentially the energetic resources required to raise a baby into kind of full grown adulthood are greater than one person actually has the ability to accommodate. It takes more energy for a mother to raise a baby than she has. And
Yes.
so and so
Wow.
therefore we evolved to raise our babies in a village, essentially. And
Yep.
and there've been like different permutations and combinations of how that has existed for our ancestors. And then with the rise of capitalism, the kind of rise of the nuclear family, and this idea of the segregation of work, where this kind of dominant socialization that like women were meant to stay at home and look after the children and men went out to work. This all kind of came at the end of the feudal times when we want to get into history, and it's been like that ever since in various ways. And so ultimately, yeah, we've got it's essentially impossible
It's
in many ways to
yeah.
raise our babies without help. And we've got modern iterations of the village now. We've got daycare, we've got nannies if you're privileged enough to be able to
If
access
you're
those
privileged
things.
enough. Exactly.
And or if your cultural values hold that other family members are meant to be there to look after the children. And sometimes that varies between different kind of upbringings and lineages and things like that.
Yeah, the fact that, to your point, like as we've evolved, living more siloed in our own little boxes in suburban communities, and even honestly in cities where there's still just like less connection, like the way that you're not living in like I don't want ghetto in the sense of people living together as it and bartering and supporting each other and whatever. Everyone's just in their own silos. Even when I lived in New York City, I didn't even know my neighbors at all. And I lived there for years. And anyway, what I'm getting at is so yes, it's like we've evolved so much. We're away from ancestors and family and and we not only, if even in the most strongest, the person who is the most woman with the strongest constitution, like a Viking, let's say, who has no trauma, and even she is already under capacity. But then add in things like neurodivergence, add in people that have more porous nervous systems, like myself. I definitely am an IHSP. Sometimes wonder if I'm level 1 autistic. I'm a self-projected projector in human design, very sensitive. I'm an introvert. So I don't even get out of the car at the bus stop. And that's not because I'm being rude. It's because I don't have the capacity with all that I'm holding with my kids, with my work, with my this to even conjure up small talk and put on a face. Like I just can't even mask anymore. And so it really is this kind of complex layered issue that we're just really all struggling in our isolation. And it's unfortunate that I feel as though the fact that we don't have paid parental leave that's long enough and fair enough. And we're like, I think was it the second richest country that doesn't have paid parental leave? Is that correct? And then on top of it, the cost of childcare, it's also prohibitive. And so I don't know if I would love for you to illuminate if you have ideas and solutions around how mothers in this this day and age, what can they do to resource them to support themselves in motherhood and not be like burnt out wrecks? You guys, your well life has just gotten an upgrade, and it's honestly one of the things I've been wanting to offer for the longest time. Because honestly, the most powerful thing in healing comes from when we feel witnessed and someone shares something that helps unlock awareness in ourselves. So many of you tell me the same thing, that hearing how someone actually navigates the hard stuff, the mindset, the shifts, the stumbles, the tools, is what helps you feel less alone, less ashamed, more connected, more seen, and helps to illuminate where you might be either feeling the same or actually can implement those things for your own journey. So that's why I created this private podcast space. There are parts of my journey that are honestly too tender, too nuanced, or too sacred for social media, for the public. But those are the very stories that tend to unlock something in others. These are the shares that aren't polished or performative. They're real. They're for the ones who crave honest, behind-the-scenes glimpses into how I'm walking through healing, motherhood, nervous system recovery, marriage, business, identity, life. So for $8 a month, you'll get access to these deeper, more personal audio drops, honest reflections I don't share publicly, real-time glimpses into what I'm walking through, the tools, practices, and shifts I'm using to move through it. So if my public podcast speaks to you, this is where it gets even more nourishing. So subscribe to the private podcast feed, link below. And if you want the full experience, my Substack is where this all comes together. So in your Well Circle on Substack for $12 a month, you'll receive everything the private podcast has, plus monthly audio and written drops of tools, practices, and rituals, soul-led reflections to support your well-being journey, access to community threads and conversations with other moms walking this path, invitations to private circles and behind-the-scenes shares. It's really your soft place to land, to be in connection and in a village for your healing. And it's a space where resonance, reflection, and real life support on your own time, low lift, because ain't nobody got time for anything else. That link is below. Do you want your voice to be part of the podcast? You have a question you want me to answer on the show or something you're moving through that you'd want my perspective on? You can share your story or ask a question directly, anonymous or not, using the link in the comments. I'll feature your share on air and respond with insight, support, and love. Let's keep making this space a place where we heal together.
Yeah, totally. I think what you're naming here is really important. It's actually the first step, is knowing that the struggles that you may be experiencing in motherhood are they likely have systemic roots, not because you're failing. And I think sometimes, again, like saying that, like the pamphlet with the word matrescence on it, like sometimes I think saying that alone can be so healing.
Yes.
For so many of us, because yeah, it just takes that shame and blame away and helps us to realize not only that is it not our fault, but also that we're not alone, that we're all, to varying degrees, obviously based on our privileges, we're all experiencing this really oppressive culture within which to become a mother in similar
Yeah.
ways, or we're all experiencing it. Do I know how to solve the oppressions that
You
affect
don't,
mothers?
Jesse? Get out of here.
I know, right? I do not. And as with so many of these things, we have to do what we can where we can, and speak the truth of our motherhood to the powers that be. And I think the fascinating, like, here we are, because we're mothers, we can hold this paradox. The fascinating paradox is that, um, do we go through this developmental process of maturation in spite of or because of some of these challenges that we face? And I think there's
Yes.
there's no answer to that. And it's not to say that we don't. It's like we would never say, oh, just because you might become a stronger person after recovering from cancer, that we shouldn't look up cures for
No.
cancer. It's not that. It's not that. That we should still do this hard work of changing systems.
Yep.
Um, and it's interesting, like, there's a certain extent when I think of maybe our ancestors, they probably also had a hard time in this transition to motherhood. And it probably wasn't because of lack of paid childcare, or
Yeah.
lack of paid maternity leave, right? So there's, to some extent, this transition has always been challenging. And it's always been something that, like, makes us
But we haven't
hopefully.
named it and we haven't, right.
Sure. And then there's a
Or
certain
yeah.
extent to which there's this particular confluence of modern influences that make it really challenging.
Challenging.
And yeah, and what to do other than to speak the truth of it, to have compassion for yourself, and try to locate yourself within those kind of broader systemic and societal structures.
I
Yeah.
feel that you actually did have some really powerful insights that I'm going to ask you to speak on because
Sure.
and there's one thing I actually afterwards want to go back to, but you mentioned this rocked me. You mentioned this term called the nourishment barrier, and you spoke about how in this world of self care and basically the how we've been really there's all of this conversation and the narrative around like having strong boundaries and taking care of ourselves when really at the end of the day, one, community care over self-care, but also when we can recognize that at the end of the day, like our cup is never going to be completely full. And if we can, and if we can actually honor that nobody's cup is full and learn how to meet ourselves and others where we are, lower the expectation and be able to learn how to give and receive from our lowered capacity, how that kind of also awareness, conversation, and skill is so important because I feel like we have, to your point, like we have this pressure and this story that like I can't because I'm not like fully resourced. But if we can recognize that nobody is, and in this moment we won't be, like, how can we lean into meeting ourselves and others where are and start to leverage this idea of community care and interdependence right where we are?
Yeah, great question. So I'll back up a couple of steps and say that the second half of MotherShift, the book, focuses on what I call the mother powers. And there are these 7 capacities and skills that we have the potential to learn in matrescence. And they're things that help us get through our own experience of matrescence. And there are also things that our world really needs right now. So maybe I was like, I do have a theory about how we might change the world. But one of those mother powers is self-tending. And so that's what you're
What did you say?
speaking to,
Sorry.
self-tending. And so
Okay.
that's self-tending as opposed to self-care. That's a whole section in the book, and you're speaking to 2 pieces of that. One of them is the nourishment barriers, is a theory basically that says that essentially sometimes our self-care, we might do all the good things, and the effects of those are, it's almost like we have a brick wall and they come up against this brick wall and slide off, and they don't actually impact us or enter our kind of body and psyche. And the nourishment barrier can come from a couple of different experiences. It can be from very early childhood experiences that, for whatever reason, made it feel unsafe to receive care. So usually like early attachment experiences. They can also be sort of attachment experiences that we have in really pivotal moments of our lives that again, make us feel unsafe to receive care. And so we put up this nourishment barrier because receiving care actually feels vulnerable. So
Yep, exactly.
that's one way in which that can function. The other way in which that can function is just somatically when we're kind of burnt out, we're a little crispy, we've been like operating this sympathetic zone for too long. What happens is that our kind of awareness narrows to an awareness of threat, basically. So all we can see is things that are bad and things that are threatening to us. And it's a very adaptive thing. You know, it comes from, okay, if you're under high stress, you're looking for more terrible things to happen so that you can protect yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's adaptive until it's not. When, you know, so when we're burned out, all it becomes very hard to see what is good and positive. And perspective becomes very myopic. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's
Yes.
a different way that kind of a nourishment barrier can develop in the sense that, again, good things can happen. We might be doing all the quote unquote right things to care for ourselves. And because we're actually burnt out, those things hit that brick wall and slide off because we can't see the good. We can't, you
Yep.
know, hold the stress
Experience.
and see like the rainbow in the sky or like the smile on our kid's face. We can't take that in. So that's kind
Yes.
of that nourishment barrier piece. And it certainly makes more complex that whole question of self-care and self-tending.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, no, go ahead. I was
No,
just going to answer the other part of your question, but
oh, yeah.
yeah.
No, I just want to say that I forget, I think I was going to say, I actually forgot. So we'll go back to it. Don't worry. Go ahead.
Okay. That's okay. And the
Mom
other
brain.
piece, that's okay. Yeah. The other piece that you were speaking to is just this idea that we should only give from a full cup, right? And that we have to take care of ourselves before we take care of everybody else. And my theory with that is that we are not living in a world where it's realistic to have a full cup.
Yeah.
Um, and it's not getting any better. And we know that actually we are going through like multi system collapse. And so things are going to get harder. And so rather than trying to, it's like the transition of other than trying to scramble back to the way things were, we really have to adapt to how things are. We're going to get any easier to live in this world. And so let's work from the assumption that you're not going to have a full cup. This is a slippery slope here, right? Because obviously, I'm not saying you should murder yourself and give yourself to others when you are totally like scraping the floor, right?
Yeah.
You're in really rough shape. But I do think that there's more nuance to this, right? Sometimes being of service to our communities or our families or offering our time and companionship and whatever actually does generate energy.
Mm.
And this is kind of speaking to this wider piece of community, which is also a mother power in the book. And like, how do we build community when we're under resourced? Like, we need community so badly as mothers, and yet who the heck has energy to go out and make friends? And so
Ah,
this is
yeah.
like where this comes from is if you're waiting to have a full cup to have some mom friends over for a cup of tea or
It ain't yeah.
send a jar of your homemade granola over to somebody who's sick or something, then that's never going to happen and you're never going to have the community that you desire. And so I'm actively in the question of how might it be possible to be a community member and to contribute to the growth of the village in our lives, even though we're going in and we're going through it, right? And even
Yeah.
though things are really challenging and we might not be well resourced, let's assume we're never going to be fully well resourced and never have
Yep.
that like utopic, perfect, oh my gosh, everything is going right. And so now I have time to whatever, call up that friend, right?
Yep. I
That's kind
feel
of that idea.
Oh my God, I love so much. And I took notes this time, so then I remembered. First of all, on the point you just said, if we're all burnt out and holding so much and need really community and that interdependence to thrive, but then like, how do we get there? A couple of things that came to mind are like, I feel this is like, this is just the thing that I'm constantly coming back to, but I genuinely feel it all leads back to us all being more vulnerable and real and unmasked. I do. I feel as though what prohibits so much of us is us feeling like on the receiving and the giving is feeling like we're being too much, feeling like our house is too messy, feeling we're whatever, like feeling like nervous about the way we're going to be judged or saying the wrong thing or looking like a mess or whatever. But if we all just honored the messiness of the humanity and the human experience and our homes and our inner and our outer world, gave each other and ourselves more grace. Listen, I'm not saying this is the easiest thing, but I think that would allow us all to drop a lot of the weight and meet ourselves and each other where we are, in the sense that as I even felt myself, and I'm completely, while this is the work that I'm most committed to myself, is like this unmasking and being my most authentic self. I'm a human too, with all the layers of shame and conditioning and all the things. And I know that, like, when I moved to my new town, and even still sometimes I'm like, someone new's coming over to pick up their kids and I'm scurrying around or worried that they're going to see my messy house or whatever the heck it is. And anyway, so I just think that, and at the end of the day, like, really being something that I'm working on is being okay with not scurrying around, letting the person seeing the mess, me sitting with the discomfort, and then realizing the person that saw the mess actually was like, oh my God, thank God your house is a mess, because me freaking too, you made me feel better. And the person who is judgy McJudgester don't care, like trying to don't care. You know what I mean? And I don't know, that's just something that came up for me. And also doing what we can. Like, I know a friend of mine was dealing with some digestive issues, whatever. And while I had some ideas of like various products and things she needed, I did have a box of this tea that I thought took nothing from me, that I had an extra, and I was like, here, take this box of tea. It didn't take any energy, you know what I mean? But it felt like something supportive. And so I don't know, that's just something, I think this journey of self-acceptance or kind of like vulnerability and grace is, I think, one of the ways forward. Again, I don't have all the answers. And then the other thing that, and like doing what feels good to you. I feel like if you're, I know sometimes I have a friend who does, I don't, in this winter, like a soup swap, and everyone does like a big thing of soup, and you can, things like that, where it's, if it feels good to you and, or you're already baking 12, I don't know, no one's making 12 lasagnas, but you know what I'm saying? You're already doing something, but, or you have strawberries and your neighbor has mint, something like that. Those are some things. But something also came up for me is when you mentioned, oh, so true. When we are in the burnout, when we are in the place of stress, and how myopic it gets, our literally, our vision narrows, our mindset narrows, we're literally often shut down, and we actually don't have the access to our creativity and curiosity. And we actually forget, like, I know I forget all the people I can call for support. I forget because I'm so like closed out. And so I like, aside from obviously like somatic things, but really I literally have a list now, because there are times where when I feel really down, like, I have no one to call, no one will understand, you know what I mean? And then
Yeah.
after I feel better, I'm like, oh my God, I could have called her. Oh my God, I could have called her. I could have called her. So I like literally make a list and I have it on my phone. I'm like, when you are feeling like you need support, like, these are the people who deeply see you. These are the people that feel like whatever. And then I'm like, oh, then I can go to it. And I feel things like that. Or even I've heard people say before, making like a joy list, or things that kind of, because you forget in the moment of like things that you can do to help yourself feel better, because you're so just stuck. And it does sometimes take, even if you look at the list and you're like, oh, I could go for a walk. You're like, I don't want to. I just want to scroll TikTok or whatever it is. But then being like, but you wrote this and it helped you last time and you have the evidence. So I don't know. I just wanted to provide that as kind of solutions that might be helpful to someone listening. But something you talked about that I was like, ooh, I got to talk to her about this. And we, I know, touched on it, but some might be going back. But can you speak on, you mentioned something called the grandmother hypothesis and what the something about the orca and what they can teach us about caregiving. I was like, wait, is there some stat and information I need to know about how these concepts validate the experience of a mother not being able to hold it all? I don't know.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So the grandmother hypothesis is basically there are, I think it's just humans and orcas. I'm pretty sure those are the only two mammals that actually survive past menopause.
Oh,
And
wow.
the theory is that the grandmothers were evolved essentially to be able to look after, help look after the young. Again, hyperburden and evolving for the village. And so, yeah, that's the grandmotherhood of this.
Hey, Mama, imagine if healing your stress patterns could change everything. Because it can. Whether it's reacting in ways you don't recognize, people pleasing, or overthinking, these patterns stem from unresolved trauma stored in your body. They create chronic stress, impacting your health, relationships, and how you show up in life. That's why I created the Align and Thrive Workbook, a free 5-day mini training designed to help you heal at the root. You'll learn what trauma is and how it's showing up in your body and life. You'll be guided through a proven 5-step process to heal and rewire these patterns, shifting from reactive and overwhelmed to aligned and in flow. You'll get a comprehensive workbook filled with practices and journal prompts to help you implement this work starting now. It's truly transformational. It's what I wish I had when I was struggling on my journey, and it's completely free. Download your Align and Thrive workbook for free today. Head to www.mishavainer.com/workbook and let's begin this journey together. You can also click on the link in the show notes and grab it today. That is fascinating. So, like, it's basically speaking to the fact that the entire purpose is to help the young and then you're done. Is that correct or no?
That's a strong way of putting it, but yeah, essentially that grandmothers, yeah, evolved to survive longer, essentially, so that they
Okay.
could help their
Love it.
daughters raise their young. Yeah,
Okay. All right.
yeah,
How can another thing that you touched on that I want to dive into is the motherhood rage. I think there's so many factors in this that, and I would love to chat about as many as we have capacity and time for, but I know that I feel like it's extra present, particularly right now. The amount of mothers that I am in conversation with that feel such rage right now because it's beyond feeling sad. And so I would like for you to illuminate and validate this rage from your work because you do it so well, and then chat about it.
yeah, totally. Yeah, so rage is something that I kind of, um, lump into sort of all of the really complex feelings that we can feel in this transition to motherhood. And you talked earlier about feeling grief and sadness of leaving ourselves or parts of ourselves that really matter to us behind. And rage can come in there too. And I think sometimes that's rage because of those wider systemic factors that make it so unfair, really, to be raising kids in this stage. Often that rage gets channeled towards the people closest to us. One of the conversations that I see increasingly, I talk about it a lot in the book, is the rage towards our partners if we're partnered,
Yep,
and
that's the
particularly
piece.
with, yeah, particularly with male partners who may have been socialized that actually caregiving is not their job. Um, and that's a whole podcast. That may even be a whole series because
Yep.
that's a big conversation. But just to name and validate, that is certainly something that is part of a lot of experiences of matrescence. And I think, as with everything, both grief and rage, there is wide spectrum, and there is a part of the spectrum where rage can actually be a symptom of postpartum depression or another postpartum mood disorder. And we always have to keep our eye on that. But at the same time, I think our rage makes sense. Our rage makes sense in
Our
a
rage makes
culture that
sense.
is, it does. And I think the thing with rage is that it can go in two directions. We can swallow it and internalize it because we feel like we shouldn't be feeling this way. We feel shame. We maybe have been subject to socialization that women do not feel rage, or that mothers who are rageful are bad mothers. So we internalize it. That's
We
really
feel
toxic.
shame about. Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah,
really toxic. And then rage though is also an exciting emotion because
it is.
when directed and channeled, it's got a lot of heart and muscle and energy to change things that are unfair. Essentially, that's what The sort of psychological definition of anger and rage is like a response or reaction to something that is unfair. And when we are able to actually externalize that rage rather than it and use it to make a difference in our relationships, if that's our intimate partnerships or all the way up to those bigger, broader systems and societal structures that are profoundly unfair, then we can use our rage to a good end. And so it's very common, and does not mean you're broken, but it needs to be wielded with care.
Yeah. So a few things. One, I think it's really important to name that, like, when we are in the grief and the sadness, that is like the surface emotion, and like rage and anger really is like a healthy expression that comes after we've already, like, to your point, it's like the rising of what's been living in us. And I love that you named that it's really a response to unmet needs or unmet expectations.
Mhm,
Two things that there's so many things I want to go on here, but one is something you mentioned before is the it's like a rage regarding our lack of autonomy of our
mhm,
bodies, which I just was like, that is really fascinating. I'll never forget when when I had my first child, and I've always been someone who's been passionate about my career and my purpose. And when I had my first child and my husband would go to work and I was home with the baby, which I just remember feeling like it wasn't anger, it was rage, being like, "You get to leave the house and go talk to people and be a human, and I will never have that." Even if I had someone care, even if, let's say, he was a stay-at-home dad, I would never feel that free. I would never, I would
mhm,
never feel that unencumbered in my body. My body
mhm,
was now different, everything. And it was this rage, not like specifically mad at him for working, but just it was like I couldn't put my finger on why I was so mad at him leaving, but it was all of those things. It's because all of a sudden I have a loss of all these aspects of me that I no longer have. And so I think that, like, really having that perspective of like where it comes from is so helpful. And then,
mhm.
like, diving into the conversation about partners, because that's the biggest one I think that I'm in conversation with people about right now. And being that I think, given what we've talked about, how much we're all carrying already that is beyond, and then there, and then like how we're also just more intuitively wired to carry the mental and emotional load. It's and not and the men, just many men aren't as intuitively inclined and don't realize how much this exhausts women. And I feel like that leads to so much resentment, feeling unsupported. And so I would love to just go into that piece around this term you mentioned. I was just like, this is so good. You were like, the solution isn't another whiteboard chore chart. And so I would love for you to talk about what you think does help. And I have an idea too, but I would love to hear
Mhm.
what you think, what could help in this rage with respect to how much we're holding and in the dynamics with our partners of how far we are.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. It's a really big conversation, and there's a lot of nuance here. Let me see how I can work our way through this. So, you were saying that this kind of capacity or propensity to take on this mental and emotional, and I would also say spiritual load for our family is instinctive or intuitive. And it's actually, there's a lot
Not.
of research to show that now, recently, research to show
Mhm.
that in fact,
Ooh,
yeah, that in fact, caregiving is a learned behavior. There's nuance to this, right? Essentially, some of this research now that's just now coming out in recent years is showing that there are physiological and brain neurological changes that happen in the caregivers who are not the birthing person. And they're very similar to those kind of caregiving, like those
wow.
caregiving related physiological shifts that happen in a mother when they first become a mother. So there's this theory essentially that caregiving is a learned behavior, and that those kind of physiological and neurological changes only happen though with repeated daily exposure to caregiving. So this is where the nuance comes in, right?
Wow.
Because most of us, many of us in like Western culture are in situations where we're socialized as women to assume that we will take on that caregiving role. And also like we're socialized that way from a very young age. So the chances are we've been learning how to caregive since we were toddlers, right? We've been
Yes.
looking after our baby dolls, we've been looking after our siblings, and if we're talking about cishet partnerships, our male partners have likely been socialized. That is not something that they're meant to be doing. So
Mm.
the learning actually doesn't begin with
In motherhood.
having a baby. Yeah,
Oh,
it begins so early, right?
early.
And it extends beyond just that sort of day-to-day caregiving. I think often of the conversations that I have with people in general, I'd say 85% of them are like the topic of mothering comes up, right? And what are you doing and what school and what thing are you having? Like we were talking about motherhood, even if there's no,
Yeah.
and I'll speak for my partner, but I think this goes across the board in a lot of ways. Like they're not talking about parenting. So like
Yeah.
even in my like outside of mothering social relationships, I'm still learning how to parent,
You're
right?
still
Whereas like my husband's talking about golf or something, right?
right.
Um, this is so cliche, and I know we want to reject those socializations, but they also do impact us, right? And so we have to know what we're working with here. And so by the time we hit motherhood, first of all, if we have carried our babies, we've been pregnant with our babies, we've been learning this whole time, this whole 10 months,
How to,
what it is to care for ourselves. And we're like thinking of another in a way that's really embodied. Again, our partner, it often feels pretty abstract until a baby comes on the scene. And then our partners often have to go back to work and they're full time, where this is a kind of painting with a wide brush, very common experience that
yeah.
the mom stays home and the dad goes to work. And so where is their chance to learn? And then
Yeah.
on top of that, hearing those messages that like this kind of toxic, that impact of toxic masculinity that says men don't nurture, men don't. So there's all of this learned behavior. And then I also, and again, this is super nuanced, but I do talk about in the book that there is um, some level of intuitive or innate caregiving capacity that we do have. And people would argue with me on this, but I've seen it, particularly in my doula practice, where it's just so visceral, right? So visceral that we know how to protect and care for our young in a lot of different
Yeah.
ways. And there's this kind of nature nurture thing that's going on. But ultimately, we've got all of these massive, way bigger than us influences impacting this very tight dynamic between us and our partners. And
Yeah.
so yeah, the whiteboard chore chart is not going to work if your partner has been taught since he was a child that he is not a caregiver. Caregiving is something that men do, for example. And
I think there's
yeah,
even a,
I think there's so much to say there and there's so much nuance, but that's yeah, that's kind of
yeah,
the gist of it, maybe.
totally. I'm going to just make some notes because I'm going to forget. But yeah, I think for one, I just want to say it's fascinating that you mention that we're equally equipped, but that it's a learned and a conditioned thing, which goes back to really like however one was raised or what that was modeled to them, which is really interesting. And I think a few things. Part one, I think that simply by, to your point, like we've been, the thread of our whole conversation is by having this awareness and continuing to have the conversations with our partners that like, no, like you are as, it may not have been modeled, but you are as equipped, and like we get to learn this, and having these conversations about also what we're holding, illuminating to them how much more it is, and like that we do need, we aren't capable of doing it all the way that maybe it might have been handled several generations in the past, I think is one way to help just even bring forward the conversation of it not, because I think there is often a lack of understanding from what I've seen in conversations on like posts in Facebook posts from people and from conversations I've had that initially there's a block from men of I'm working, you're at home, why can't you do it all? And I'm being extreme when I say that, but if they can understand the complexity and what was, if they're like, oh, it's always been this way, it's no, but like it's different now. I think that there needs to be a little bit of that. And then I also feel like I was listening to a podcast the other day and they were talking about the fair play model. Are you familiar? Yeah, and how she talks about the like conceptualize, plan, execute, and how like what men are really often just doing the execution part, which is the easiest part and takes 5 seconds, but the like thinking of which trip to go on and having all the conversations and looking at the kids' calendars and figuring out when to go and pricing things out and like figuring out what's best for them and the time of year and what blah, 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 all of that thinking and research and all of that. And then it's, yeah, if you send me the link, I can book it. That's the easy piece. And so I feel being able, I've been with my husband, who, by the way, was modeled with the dad doing a lot of it and is a very well intentioned, caring, helpful man. And also, not he's just not at the place that I'm at, I feel like, in some ways. And I think that's another thing. I think a lot of men are well intentioned, they're just haven't learned. And so I feel like I sometimes feel like giving low lift things for them to do and mess up with to help them learn those things is, I think that it's even feels even more appropriate, knowing that I had been saying this whole time, I know I'm like better at it because I'm intuitively inclined or like it comes naturally to me, but no, they just need to learn it and practice it more. They haven't had as much practice and modeling. That's really interesting.
Yeah, you got it.
And I actually wonder, I like the nurturing piece. So I see my husband, he's so nurturing when it comes, not that he's, when it comes to our pets, like he's just so much more affectionate than he is with humans.
Mhm,
I don't know. That just came up for me. Does that, I don't know. Maybe it feels safer. I don't know.
mhm,
But
mhm,
I do feel that I just want to name, I do feel that men in general, I do feel that there's a lot of well intentioned, big hearted men that literally just they don't know what they don't know. They haven't. So
yep,
maybe if the conversations come forward, if they understand more of why they haven't, it doesn't come as naturally to them because maybe they don't do it as much because they feel it's just not something that they will be able to do well. So they're like,
mhm,
you're made for this. I'm not made for this. But if they understand, no, you're
yep,
made for this too. You
mhm,
just, then there's, oh, it's a
yeah.
skill I can build.
Right. That's like the kind of old-timey paradigm of, "Oh, no, women are just better." Um,
Yeah.
and again, there's a real slippery slope between that sort of nature and nurture. Like you've been, since you got pregnant with that baby, if your pregnancy was part of your journey, you've been learning the whole time. And so even by the time that baby lands in the world, you've already learned so much. And what you're saying is like there's this disparity between it's huge, it feels insurmountable, partner to catch up to all that learning. And I think you're right. I think this is the really tricky part is that I think there are a lot of caring, modern, quote unquote, modern, well intentioned men who are just still not even remotely carrying their share of the load. And they mean, but
Mhm.
it's not good enough.
Yep.
And I will say that I think it takes a big person to be able to hold the rage and resentment and disappointment and then the subsequent expectation that we
Oh,
have and to be able to hear that and receive that and rather than to
yes.
become defensive because it's very threatening, it's
Yes.
so threatening to hear and you're not doing enough, you're not good enough, you're not,
Mm.
maybe you were taught to provide and you're not providing, I'm miserable, I'm overburdened. And right, and we have all of these systems that are set up to see us fail anyways, so it feels
Yeah.
insurmountable. And
Yes.
also I got no hacks for that. I feel like our male partners have to actually
Level
um
up.
level up, build the emotional robustness and
Yes.
fortitude to be able to own that this is a big job and validate, yes, you have been doing the bulk of the emotional labor, and then to get down to work and figure out how to meet that sort of, if we're aiming for fair play, quote unquote,
Yeah.
um, how to meet that. And I think, yeah, fair play can be a really great way to start having that conversation, because you're right, it's that conceiving of that first step of conceiving that there's actually something to be done, is that really invisible labor that a lot of women find themselves doing and that a lot of men don't. My husband and I have gone through this too. We're not like magical. We do also have whiteboards, a lot of them.
Yeah.
But,
Us too.
but it's only because we've done that deeper work of
Yes.
like, why have we fallen into these patterns, and how can we have generative conversations where I can actually point the finger and you can hold that, right? And you can be like,
Yes.
yeah, I can do better. And it's now, I love, this year I was doing a lot of PR and book promotion, book touring for my book this spring, and we have a very big acreage with a ton of gardens, and usually I'm like the CEO of the garden, like figuring out what to plant and how to look after everything. But ultimately, I'm not a professional. I just Google shit, right?
Yeah. Right.
I just Google, like, when are you supposed to pick the somethings? When are you supposed to plant the whatevers? This year, because I was totally like, I was absent for a lot of that time, my partner did it, and he Googled things and he figured it out. And now he's actually, this year, he's the CEO of the garden. Like,
Oh,
I asked him, what needs pruning? What needs weeding? Tell me where these go. And it's like, what?
yes. Give the
It's
man,
a
what is
total.
it? Give the man a fish? No. Give a man a fishing pole. I don't know. You know what I'm talking.
I do. I think we also have a cultural narrative that really underestimates men. You see those commercials of a man trying to clean the bathroom or something, and it's comical because he doesn't know what he's doing. That's really
Right.
insulting,
It
actually,
is
and it
insult.
really,
I
it
agree.
underestimates their capacity, but it also gives them an out, right? It gives them this,
Yeah. They're like, it's
we
not my
call it.
job. Yeah.
Totally. We call it weaponized incompetence. I don't know how to do that. But actually that
Yeah.
becomes weaponized in the sense that now it's your job because I don't know how to do it, even though you
Yeah.
could totally figure it out. You're an adult. Right. And I think at the
Totally.
crux of all this is something I talk about in the book. Ray wrote about it really beautifully and said, yes to all of this. And fundamentally, the man has to be willing.
Yes.
And a lot of men are unwilling.
That is very
And
true.
I don't mean to speak like broadly or harshly, but I think it's true. It's what I hear from so many people, that ultimately on the surface, I'm a caregiver and I want to do my part but actually I'm unwilling to do the unlearning and the sort of renegotiation of roles to be able to get to a place where things look more fair.
Yeah. I have a few things to say, but I want to see, are you okay to go over a little bit? Because I don't know what your schedule.
I have another call at 1:30. So
Okay.
yeah,
So I'll just wrap up these last thoughts and then
sure.
go into, okay. I could talk to you for hours. So I just want to say, for firstly, just responding to some of the things you said with respect to the weaponized incompetence, is that what it is? It's really
Mhm.
interesting because I just want to name that it goes both ways, in that I still don't know how to open a wine bottle. I don't drink alcohol, but there was a time I did and I still didn't, because I whose model to me was damsel in distress. My mom said, I can't lift the suitcase. I can't open the oops, who somebody else do it. And my parents are Indian and they had people where there was certain things that like I just then learned, if I don't need to do it, someone else can do it. And I'm not proud of that. I'm just saying that it's interesting how, yeah, that we all can relate to that probably in our own ways. But I love how you said, first of all, as it relates to if we got to 50-50, I like how also I heard someone say that it doesn't necessarily always have to be 50-50, but really if potentially one way to do it is if there's a situation that's happening or there's something that needs to happen, if you both brainstorm together all of the tasks that need to happen or what needs to happen, and then explore who would be better suited based on whatever the capacity and skills are in that moment to take on. And just, but essentially negotiating with each other so that you do both feel good about whatever that balance is for that season of life. To your point with the garden and him taking it on versus you, love how you said about the nervous system piece around it does require someone who is willing to hear and hold all of that feedback. And I think that Like it requires someone who is willing to, has the capacity and to the self, what is the word? I don't know, that's conscious enough or that's evolved enough or self-aware enough to really be able to hold it without getting angry or deflecting, and have that like ability to hold the polarity of those big emotions and have the capacity to listen to that. And I think to your point, like I think that is something that's probably the biggest piece, because I know in a lot of pieces, I can see there's a lot of people that want to do it and understand the concepts, but it's really a nervous system level thing and doing that deeper work, like you said. And I love that. And okay, I wish I could get into the project body love piece, but we'll
Oh,
have
yeah.
to, I'll have to have you on another time if you're open to
Sure.
it, because I
Hmm.
know that we're running out of time. Thank you so much for everything you've shared today. I've loved chatting with you. This was so fun, so informative. And if it's okay, I'm going to ask some rapid fire questions now to close. And that is, if a mother is listening right now and she feels like she's barely hanging on, what do you want her to know?
Yeah, I would say that you're not alone.
Hmm.
And, that probably what you're going through is normal. And this part of this normal developmental process of matrescence. And that's not to say don't get help, but like I said earlier, you're not broken, you're becoming. And it's not easy, but there's also lots and lots of potential and power that you can access in this time. Definitely get support, definitely talk to others about it, but know that, you know, it's gonna be okay.
Mhm.
It's gonna be
Yeah. And you're
okay.
turning into a superwoman, getting new powers and skills.
You are.
So, what do you hope the mother shift will awaken in women and heal in women, maybe?
Beautiful. I think, okay, my big vision for this work is goes well beyond actually motherhood. And
Mm.
I talked earlier about how we know that we're not in a polycrisis. We are in a polycrisis, and there are many ways in which our worlds are changing, both individually and collectively. And what my ultimate hope is to instill in people a sense of transformation literacy. And it's
Mm.
how do we not only weather changes in our lives, but how do we become more ourselves in the process? How do we become leaders and elders in our communities in the process? How do we allow changes to make us and not just break us? And matrescence, like this work around matrescence is, I think, for a lot of us who have children, is a place, a way in to transformation literacy. If you know in your bones what it feels like to grieve an old self and to know that's normal and to have some skills and capacities that support you in that process, then the next time that something changes and you feel grief and sadness about it, you've got
You have
this sort
the
of
tools.
capacity and skill. You've got the tools, you've got the resources. And that's my big dream for
Oh,
all of this work.
I love that. I love nothing more than helping to empower mothers with having the inner resources and skills and tools to like basically navigate life with ease and flow and from within. I think that so much of the stress comes from this external stress and looking for answers outside of ourselves, and like what you're doing with this. Oh, I love that word that you use, but transformation literacy. Oh my God, that is so incredible. I hope everyone goes and buys the book right away. Before I ask you to share where they can find you, last question, which I think you just touched on, but in case there's any threads of things missing, what's your personal vision for the future of motherhood? Is that what you just shared?
Oh gosh. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, oh my goodness, justice.
Ah,
Justice and
yes.
liberation for mothers. Yeah,
And more support and care.
yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much. Where can our listeners find you, follow you, find your book, all the things?
Yeah, sure. You can find me on the internet at www.jessieharold.com. And I'm on Instagram mostly. That's my primary social media feed. I have a monthly newsletter that I put out called Imaginalia, which is for all women who are going through life transitions. And yeah, the book MotherShift Reclaiming Motherhood as a Rite of Passage is available anywhere our books are sold. It's also an audiobook. So if motherhood has you not reading these days, you can listen.
I love
Yeah,
it. And you're also active on Instagram, which is
I
so
am.
fun
Yeah,
to watch you there.
yeah.
Thank you, Jessie. This was so lovely.
Thank you so much for having me. Great questions.
All right, friends, what'd you think? I really hope you enjoyed listening and got value from this episode of Your Well Life. If you did, it would mean the world to me if you could leave a review so we can spread the word to more mamas who can benefit from this content. It's truly my deepest mission to help as many mamas out there feel empowered, aligned, and in flow in their bodies and lives through this podcast. And even just sharing with one friend who you think can benefit helps. Want more from me? Well, then don't forget to subscribe to this podcast so you can get notified each time a new episode drops. Oh, and make sure to get on my newsletter list where I send out weekly emails to support, nourish, and inspire you. And follow me on Instagram where I'm the most active and share behind the scenes of my day-to-day life and insights I have along the way. I'm at Misha Vayner. I'm truly so grateful that you chose to spend your time with me and really hope to have you join along next week. Same time, same place. Bye for now.